HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents In the Distance with You by Carla Guelfenbein, translated by John Cullen, read by Robert Fass and Nicol Zanzarella. Part 1. 1. Danielle. Somewhere on the planet, there was someone responsible for your death. That certainty grew stronger as each day passed, bludgeoning my conscience, making itself unbearable. But who? Why? I never imagined the answer might be so close that I could turn around and meet myself. I remember the moment when I ran across the neighborhood vagrant, right after I bought the bread for our breakfast. His eyes, at once wounded and menacing, came to rest on me. I quickened my pace while the jumbled mass of people around me, all of them in raincoats, walked past and disappeared into the morning fog. A group of kids crossed the avenue. The girls, wrapped in colorful scarves and speaking in low voices, shared their secrets as they walked, while the boys ran around shouting, pushing at one another like clumsy puppies. Their innocence increased the agitation that meeting the bum had produced in me. I couldn't know what I would know a few minutes later. I couldn't know what had happened to you during the night, or maybe at dawn. Every morning before seeing you, I'd always wonder what sort of mood you'd be in. It was impossible to predict, governed by your dreams, by the intensity of the light and the temperature, by infinite layers of circumstances I never managed to figure out. Sometimes you talked to me incessantly, but at other times you would seem absorbed in listening to the sound of a world that existed inside you. When I reached your door, Arthur sat down next to me with his customary papal dignity, while Charlie feverishly wagged his tail. I was thinking I'd suggest going for one of our walks after breakfast. In spite of your age, you walked at a fast, steady clip. Anyone who saw us from a certain distance would have found it difficult to imagine that you were more than 50 years older than me. I remember a time, a few days after I became your neighbor, when I saw you at your front door doing battle with the climbing plant that obstructed your passage. You told me the thing had grown overnight. You said its obstinate presence was an affront to your personal freedom. You talked about the plant as though it were a creature of flesh and blood, while at the same time you were trying to take it apart with a kitchen knife. I fetched my pruning shears and set about clearing the entrance, and after a while we fell into animated conversation. A few weeks back I'd seen your picture in the newspaper. An important critic had praised your work in the New York Times, and the daily papers in our country had reprinted that review. Nevertheless, when I saw you in your yard, I was surprised by your height and your gray hair, which you wore gathered at the back of your neck. Time had failed to destroy your beauty. Your features must have been softer and more rounded once, but now angles were beginning to emerge, in your prominent nose, in your chin, in your cheekbones, in your lined forehead. Your long hands were like birds that had forgotten the art of flying. You were memorably vehement when you told me, some time later, that you detested performing practical tasks and would have liked to have a wife like the ones the great creators had, the wives who took care of all mundane matters and shielded the artists from the banalities of life. After you told me that, I always tried, however clumsily and incompletely, to protect you. I found the world you lived in unfathomable. But at the same time, the light pouring out of the doors you left half open filled me with agitation and curiosity about what I couldn't see. I dug around in my pocket for your house key and discovered I'd forgotten it. I rang the doorbell, but there was no response. I waited for a few seconds and tried again, and then again, more and more insistently. I remembered the bum's eyes, brutal and defeated at the same time. They stood out in my memory like a dissonant note in a music score. I turned and walked toward the left side of the yard, and Arthur, with his usual weary gait, followed me. The morning light on the gravel path was dazzlingly bright. Like the house, the yard was silent, bereft of all human presence. A violet was starting to put out its winter shoots, little lives that you'd be sure to follow attentively, as you did every year. I took a look through one of the side windows. The stripes of filtered sunlight reinforced the darkness of the hall. It took a few seconds for me to see you. You'd fallen to the foot of the staircase, where the light practically didn't reach. Your inert body lay like a toppled tree next to the standing lamp I'd given you for your last birthday. I ran to the patio in the back. The door to the kitchen was wide open. It looked as though someone had been there and, in too much of a hurry, forgotten to close the door. Who, I wondered. I crouched down beside you. Your hands were curled into claws, as if they'd been scratching invisible bodies before they surrendered. A pool of blood encircled your head. You also had a long scratch on one arm, a reddish streak that ran from your wrist to your elbow. Your nightgown was bunched up around your hips, and your pubis, smooth and white, showed between your open, elderly legs. I covered you as best I could with your nightgown, and only then did I grab you by the shoulders and shake you. "Vera! Vera!" I shouted. You seemed so light, so fragile. Everything took on the appearance of a dream. After that, things got blurry. Time started to pass in a different way, extending itself formlessly, darkly. I just remember that at some point after the ambulance arrived, I ignored orthodox procedure and lifted up your body myself, while the people around me begged me to calm down and let them do their work. I didn't want anyone to touch you. I didn't want anyone to feel the warmth your body was giving off. I didn't want anyone to hear your breathing fade away.
2. Emilia. I am you. Don't ever forget that. Jérôme told me as we were saying our goodbyes in Charles de Gaulle Airport. He was the one who had urged me to travel. Alone, I would never have gathered enough strength to leave my cloistered state. Although the idea was unimaginable, we were to be married upon my return from my trip. Through the big window in front of us, we could see the tails of the airplanes, which seemed to be hanging from the sky. I am you. Those were the words that united us, that had always united us and protected us from misfortune, like a spell. I was him, and he was me. We walked in silence to the boarding area and said goodbye without touching. The expression on his face was serene, assured. I couldn't betray the confidence he had in me. The day before, I had bid farewell to my parents in Grenoble, and Dr. Noiret, my psychiatrist, had medicated me so that I wouldn't suffer a panic attack. Even so, I couldn't help saying for the nth time, "Jérôme, I don't know if I can do this." "Sure you can, Emilia. Sure you can." He grazed my lips with an index finger to keep me from repeating what I'd said. Huddled in my seat in the airplane, looking out of my little window at the bed of clouds, I fixed my imagination on Jérôme's small-featured face. He'd always been there. He was the human race, and nothing that lived beyond him existed for me. I thought about the life we'd made together, a life without wings, but also without disasters. It's hard to settle for such a life, for such ordinariness. Extraordinary things are exciting. They call to us with their trumpets and their bright colors. But they're fragile. They break. That was the understanding we'd always had, Jérôme and I. Nevertheless, now he was letting me go. He was letting me go, and at the same time binding me to him with his marriage proposal. Why did he do that? Why had he pushed me to go, encouraging me with his rosy predictions? Out of goodness. Yes, out of the goodness of his heart. But also, and this pointed thought pierced my consciousness. Because we'd reached an impasse we had to move away from. We had to go somewhere else. We were both 24, and when you're young, the present needs to be open to the sea of future possibilities that don't yet exist. Opportunities you have to go out and look for. I had got this far holding on to his hand. But now he and our protected world, its edges frayed by wear and time, were disappearing below the clouds. Breathing cost me an effort. I asked for a glass of water. Before leaving, the sun began to grow larger. Its light ricocheted off something and came crashing through my little window with such intensity that I had to put on my sunglasses. I thought I could see the ocean far down below, fragments that looked like watery mirrors. If that was the sea, from this distance it didn't possess the violence that had frightened me as a little girl. I remembered the sea at La Serena, the city in northern Chile where my mother was born. I'd gone there a few times when I was a girl. I saw the waves rising up with their scaly texture. I saw my mother running to plunge into the heart of that wall of water and then sink under the explosion of 1,000 backlit glittering particles. I saw my father at my side, the two of us standing still on the sand, and me holding my breath, imagining that the giant whale had swallowed her forever. And at last I saw her dark head emerge from the far side of the explosion, and she waved her arms for us to see her at that distance, and we recognized, once again, her indomitable energy. Which was what had carried her so far from us so often. Far from my father's simultaneously vigilant and defeated gaze. It had been while she was on one of those forays outside the dominion of marriage that she had conceived me. They told me as soon as I could reason, my father wasn't my father. They had been married for 5 years, and they both worked in the Nice Observatory. They'd intended to have children, but my father's semen lacked the density needed for procreation. For this reason, and others that made themselves obvious to me with the passing years, my father, when my mother told him that she was pregnant by one of her student trainees, accepted the creature that was already floating in her belly. These were, for me, the predominant images of that distant place where my mother was born, and to which I was now headed. Images of her vanishing and then reappearing. Of my father's hand, next to mine, but never touching me. Our smiles united in silence, corroborating the fact that no matter what our genetic composition might have been, he and I were stranded on the same shore. Now those pieces of ocean looked tranquil, shut up in their own silence. All things have another reality, I thought, and until then I had never seen it.
3. Danielle. The room was plunged in darkness. I stepped close to you and placed my fingers on your gray head. All around us, silence and heated air. The stillness was so deep that death seemed to be looming behind it. The plastic bracelet on your wrist bore your name. You had a cast on one leg and another on one hand. Your arms were immobilized on both sides by countless tubes, which were in turn connected to the machines recording your vital signs. Beneath your closed eyelids, your eyes were pulsating. A ventilator supplied your oxygen. The doctor had explained to me that besides various contusions, your fall had caused a severe closed-head trauma, with hemorrhaging in the cerebrum. In order to buy enough time for the swelling to go down, they had put you to sleep, a euphemistic phrase that would have annoyed you. Inducing a coma was the only way of reducing cerebral activity to a minimum and keeping intracranial pressure under control. He explained himself exhaustively, your doctor. Nevertheless, when I asked him if you could hear me or perceive another person's presence at your side, he gave an ambiguous reply. That's not something we can know with certainty, he told me. But all the studies indicate that comatose patients lack perception. Vera, I said to you, and I couldn't go on. I felt a weight on my chest when I imagined the possibility that you were there, behind the body lying under the bed covers, that you were on the other side of life trying to speak to me. I took your hand and squeezed it hard. It had rained, and through the window of your hospital room I could see the reflections of the first streetlights glistening on the wet pavement. A nurse knocked on your door, and without waiting for a response, came into the room. She was a woman in her 30s, short in stature and broad in the hips. Her face seemed to have the transitory firmness of a ripe fruit. "You haven't eaten in hours," she said to me while making notes on a clipboard. "Why don't you go down to the cafeteria? Nothing's going to happen to the lady." As I didn't answer, she stopped her work for a moment and looked at me. Then she took a step backward and adjusted her hair, which was done up in a bun. Her cheeks reddened. I could tell that she felt intimidated by me. "It's good that you talk to her and keep her company. I'm sure she can hear you." I would have liked to ask her to say more, but her flushed face made me abandon the idea. "My name is Lucy. If you need something, all you have to do is press this little button." When she went away, I sat in the chair next to your bed and dozed off. At regular intervals, another nurse would come in to check your vital signs, and I would start awake. It was during one of those sudden returns to consciousness, sometime in the middle of the night, when I felt a pang of regret at knowing so little about you, about your origins, your family, your life. You'd had a husband and a son, Manuel Perez and Julian, but you never talked about them. All I knew about your son was that he'd died of a lung disease at the age of 30. The mystery you surrounded yourself with in order to face the world had resisted me too, despite our closeness. After the news of your accident was made public, I couldn't help noticing that no one came forward and claimed to be a member of your family. Even though the grief of those who did show up, writers, poets, men and women of letters, was obvious, none of them seemed to have known you very well. The only person I contacted was your poet friend Horacio Infante. I didn't have his number, but Gracia got it somehow. I had deduced from our conversations, even though you never stated it directly, that Infante meant a lot to you. On the telephone his voice sounded shocked. I couldn't help noticing, however, that he never showed up at the hospital. I tried to speak to him again, but I was unable to get hold of him. I left my cell phone number on his voicemail and told him to call me if he wanted to know how you were doing. I learned from the papers that he'd returned to Paris, his place of residence, a few days after your accident. While the first blue gleams of dawn began to tinge the darkness, I thought that under the wrapping of your body, your heart was beating, and that you were that heart. Even though you couldn't hear me, that was where you lived now, secluded inside its walls, going on with your life, but in another form. Confused by my sleepless night, I left the car at the hospital and returned home on foot, walking along the river. A pitiless light was growing in some corner of the mountains, showing itself above the snowy peaks and then crashing down onto the window panes. When I reached our street, I saw the tramp asleep on some shapeless sacks. He was covered with a blanket, his back against the wall of a neighbor's house. For at least a year he'd been prowling around the neighborhood, and we'd got used to his presence, his smell, the sound of the empty cans he carried slung over his shoulder, banging against one another as he walked. He was a tall fellow with a small bird-like head, and behind his ravaged appearance you could just discern the elegant man he must have been. He had never asked us for food or money, and it was hard to be clear about whether he refrained because he lived in another world or for dignity's sake. Arrived home, I took off my clothes and snuggled up to Gracia. Her warm skin aroused my senses, but she was sleeping and didn't react to my attempts to make love to her. I woke up a few hours later. My body ached all over. Gracia came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel from chest to knee. She went to the window and pulled the curtains wide open. I could see your house, with its wooden shingle roof and the vegetation that covered it. I thought that Arthur and Charlie must be hungry. As soon as I got up, I would go over and feed them. "Good morning," she said in that husky voice of hers. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept much or she'd been crying, and I was touched by the slight tremor in her chin. Her skin, always sun-browned, looked even darker against the white towel. She sat in the middle of the bed with her legs crossed, gathering up her long, wet hair at the base of her neck. Gracia possessed indisputable self-confidence. "I never asked you about that, but I know it's no virtue as far as you're concerned. You used to tell me that a creator's sole possessions were her fractures, her uncertainties, her questions and her idle pursuits, and the constant doubt about the ultimate reason why things are. Only through those cracks, you said, could something grow that had never been there before." But Gracia had no creative aspirations, and the self-assurance she displayed in all the areas of her life brought her ample benefits and rewards. She had studied engineering, but at 22 she'd begun to work in television. Now, 14 years later, she was one of the news anchors on the most popular channel, and her energetic temperament entered the homes of millions of Chileans every day. "I didn't hear you come home. Tell me about Vera," she asked. Her expression showed her distress. "They're putting her into an induced coma. Given her age, the possibility that she won't wake up again is pretty high." Gracia squeezed her eyes shut, as if an image had appeared before her pupils and wounded them. Then she shook her head from side to side, and droplets of water from her hair gleamed on the window. She gathered up her hair in a knot again and looked at the wall where she herself had framed the drawing of the facade for my museum project. It was a drawing that reminded me, every morning of every day, that one day not so long ago I had won an important prize, and maybe I still had hopes that the project would be built. "That's very tough, what you're telling me," she said, embracing herself with both arms. It had always been difficult for me to know what Gracia was feeling or thinking. When I first met her, I longed to drown the feeling of distance that had hampered me ever since my childhood, to drown it in our love. It was you, Vera, who made me see how puerile that longing was. It was you who showed me that beneath our skin there's a private world with its own structures and its own landscapes, a world no one else can ever enter. Gracia never appreciated you, and you knew it. She blamed you, in part, for my lazy days, as she called the long wait to begin construction on the museum. More than a year had passed, and the authorities still hadn't reached an agreement concerning the project. There was always someone trying to steer it forward, but also someone with more clout running it aground. Power struggles, different studies, other priorities. There was no lack of reasons to postpone it month after month, and in the meantime I'd been left hanging. Every day I got up thinking about some aspect of the design that could be improved, a new material, a steeper angle, a wider corridor, and no day passed without my opening the archives in my computer and adding or eliminating a detail. During that time, Vera, you were always there. By your side, I never felt anxious about the idle passage of the days. There were other things, our conversations, our walks, the discovery of the universe that surrounded you. It's horrible. She said, and then she stopped. What? Nothing. It's just that life changes so abruptly, so cruelly. I imagined that Gracia might be referring to something else, something related to herself or to us. I wanted to ask her, but she'd already left the bed and disappeared into the depths of her closet. Things that matter, I thought, are too raw, too disturbing to be uttered, too overwhelming. I slipped farther under the sheets and went back to sleep. At 10 that morning, I went down to the kitchen and made myself some coffee. A few minutes later I was going through the little gate in the back of the yard, the one I'd built to connect our yard to yours. Winter had given us a gift, a day filled with light you couldn't see. A luminous, low-lying little cloud of dust was seeping around the vegetation. Arthur and Charlie appeared between the bushes. Arthur, with his customary calm, looked at me incuriously and sat down on the stone path, while Charlie attached himself to my legs, sweeping the air with his tail. From the beginning of our friendship, you had insisted that I could go in and out of your house whenever I pleased. For that purpose you'd given me a copy of the key to the main entrance, and, moreover, you would leave your kitchen door unlocked. It was instantaneous trust that united us. You'd even shown me where you kept the key to your strong-box. If you ever have to open it one day, Danielle, take out everything you find inside and throw it into the trash. There's nothing worth anything, nothing but an old woman's knickknacks. And as for the papers, burn them. I don't want the dogs sniffing around my life after I die. Agreed? I didn't understand why you were entrusting me with such a personal mission. It was the first time that I thought about your family, about the people who used to be by your side and who, for some reason, had disappeared. One day you'd go too, and maybe that day wasn't so far off. Your presence in my life had changed me, in a way that wasn't visible to others, except Gracia, and for that very reason was much deeper and more meaningful. You had deposited something inside me, and you'd asked me to keep it. There it had remained, and now that you weren't around, I was afraid it would gradually disappear. I entered the hall and saw the pool of dried blood. Everything had stopped in one chaotic provisional moment. Silence reigned, a silence broken by the vague subterranean noises of the heating system. I stayed in the entrance area for a while, looking at the staircase, and then I climbed the stairs, imagining how your back, your shoulders, your knees, your head must have struck every one of them. When I reached the top step, I looked back down. The shadows of the trees came through the hall window and darted back and forth across the wall like fish. I kept walking toward your room, but I halted in front of the open door without going inside. The bed was unmade. You must have fallen in the morning, maybe a little while before I found you. I went back to the top of the stairs. I wanted to reproduce your steps and elucidate the circumstances of your accident. According to the doctor, it hadn't been caused by a sudden loss of consciousness. The scratches on your arms showed that you'd tried to steady yourself against the walls as you fell. I retraced my steps over the short distance between bedroom and stairs several times, and then I went back down. Although the staircase showed signs of wear and tear, it was solid. The handrail was firmly attached to the wall and easy to grip. The steps were carefully thought out and well-proportioned, with risers 7 inches high and treads 12 inches deep for maximum safety. The most important consideration in their modest design had clearly been practicality. As I looked at the steps, a thought crossed my mind for the first time. Maybe your fall hadn't been an accident. You were a strong woman, in complete control of yourself and your body. Your movements succeeded one another elegantly and precisely. On our walks, it was you who set the pace. There were even some times when you went so far as to poke fun at me. "Come on, let's lengthen those little strides. You're walking like an old dandy," you'd say, as you passed me. I tried to recall the image of you lying on the floor, the position of your arms, the angle of your legs, your naked pubis, but the vision was too raw, and an internal filter, unable to fix it in my consciousness, rejected it. I went out into the yard to feed the dogs. Then I went back inside and threw myself on the floor, in the exact spot where you'd fallen. What were your thoughts, I wondered, as you lay there, in that second before you slipped into unconsciousness? Some constellations I had never noticed before were portrayed on the ceiling. The figures, thin lines traced on a light blue background, made me think of the ones that watch over travelers from on high in Grand Central Station in New York. I remembered your...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?